Yeah, we're live. It is 11:17 in the morning, and this morning, what I want to talk to you about is one of the most exciting things ever. That is obviously boost pressure and its relationship to back pressure. And actually, we need to flip that script a little bit. It's the relationship between back pressure and boost pressure that's very important. And there's something that's very, very misunderstood when we're talking about this. So, first of all, guys, a lot of guys don't understand that there needs to be, or there is, a relationship between boost pressure and back pressure. And so, first of all, we need to understand, what do you mean by back pressure? Boost pressure, I think, is kind of self-evident. If we have a turbo or a blower and we force air into the intake manifold, we force more air in than the motor could otherwise ingest of its own accord. And we measure that as boost. And, guys will say, oh, yeah, boost is just a measurement of restriction. It's the amount of airflow. It's the buildup of pressure that is a result of the amount of airflow that the motor can't process. Okay, you could get into all that. That's fine. But boost pressure, pretty easy to understand. You're forcing air in. It builds up pressure. When we build up pressure and we open the valve, more air goes in that the motor can normally draw in by itself. And then we get extra power because it's forcing more air in. Pretty easy to understand. The other side of that is back pressure. Now, back pressure, where we measure that, is in between, let's say, the cylinder head. You could say that the exhaust valve, but in between the cylinder head and the turbo. So we have an exhaust manifold, sometimes a length of tubing, going to the turbo wherever we have mounted the turbo. Sometimes you could mount them remotely wherever you want. But in that system between the cylinder head and the turbo, there's going to also be pressure. There's going to be back pressure driving the turbo. That's how we make the turbo work. We have heat and exhaust flow, and we have pressure built up. And then what happens is, as we drive that airflow and the heat energy and the pressure, it drives the turbo. That spins the hot side of the turbo. It drives the impeller that basically we call a turbine, and then that's connected to a common shaft, drives the compressor, and voila, we have this reciprocating thing that we have. We provide boost, and then more exhaust energy, and then more exhaust energy to the turbo, and then more boost, and then that's how the world goes around. It's important to understand what's going on in this relationship, boost pressure to back pressure. And I'm not going to go into great detail on this. I want to focus on one particular thing. So we'll talk about, first of all, this is a test that I did long ago on the LY6. This was that Gen 4 Big Bang motor that made 1500 plus 1540 horsepower. And this was a test where I was running a bunch of different turbos. We ran an S475. This particular test I'm going to show you, we ran an S480 turbo, BorgWarner stuff. It was the LY6. It had a BTR stage 3 twin turbo cam. It had our air-to-water intercooler, the ProCharger one that we run on everything. And we had a single turbo setup running stock exhaust manifolds, feeding my Y-pipe, 2 Turbo Smart wastegates, and blowing in. This had a Dorman manifold. We had the Holley HP on it. We were running on E85. And, none of that's terribly important for what we're talking about, but just so that you guys understand kind of what the turbo setup is. And what I want to demonstrate to you is, some guys understand that when we have boost pressure, we have back pressure. And then some guys also understand that there's differing amounts of back pressure relative to the boost pressure. And that's going to be a function primarily of the turbo that you pick for this situation. But there are other things can affect it. I would argue that the kind of exhaust manifold that you pick, and whether it's a header or an exhaust manifold or the size of the pipe and all, we can talk about all the kind of little things. But really the big thing is the turbo. And so that's going to help dictate what happens with the back pressure situation. So we've talked about this a lot. When you pick a turbo for this thing, you want to make sure that you pick a turbo that's sized right for, the first thing is for your power output. You don't pick a 500 horsepower turbo to make 1,000 horsepower. It's just not going to do that. You pick 2 of them, and that would work perfectly. So you size the turbo that's right for that. And then also on the hot side, you need to look at, hey, if I want to make 1,000 horsepower, does this hot side also flow enough so that I can make 1,000 horsepower? Because you can limit yourself on either side of this turbo situation. So we'll run this thing so you guys can see all the stuff, all of the different motors. But I want to get to the boost pressure and back pressure curves, which we're going to take a look at in just a second here after we run through this. And I want to show you that what's going on with back pressure, because a lot of people tend to think that, okay, let's say that we have a turbo making 10 pounds of boost, and we have 10 pounds of boost, and it has a 1.5 to 1 boost pressure to back pressure relationship. That means if we have 10 pounds of boost pressure and a 1.5 to 1 relationship, we have 15 pounds of back pressure, right? Yes, and also no, because that's not the way that boost pressure and back pressure work, because there's another variable in here. There's another factor in here, and we're going to take a look at that right now. So this is a boost pressure versus back pressure curves. These are the curves that occurred during the run. The blue line is boost pressure. Now, in this particular case, we had a slightly rising boost pressure curve because we didn't put an electronic controller on this. I think we were just running it on a either the spring, or we were running it on a manual controller. That's not really that important, because this same thing happens regardless of what the boost pressure curve looks like. One thing I want you to notice, the green line is back pressure. So I want you to notice right away, and this is very important, this is the thing that I'm talking about today that's very, very important, is you can see that the back pressure, even though our boost pressure increased not a ton during this, but that back pressure increased a lot, and it increased with engine speed. And this is very important to understand. You have a lot more back pressure at peak RPM than you do at the start RPM. Even if the boost pressure was like, if we made this boost pressure like I said, let's say we had a peak of 12 pounds. If we had our boost pressure at 12 pounds all the way across, just dead flat across this curve, you would still see the back pressure increase like this. That's what happens every time on back pressure. And where they cross over and whether they cross over, you can also have back pressure that's lower than boost pressure. You can have back pressure that's ultimately gets even with boost pressure. And then you can have back pressure that's much greater than boost pressure. You can have all of those things happen, but it will always increase with engine speed. At least in our testing, this is exactly what it shows. And it's important to understand why that happens, because this helps in turbo selection. So if we look at that back pressure curve, we went from a low of, 6 or 7 pounds up to almost 20 pounds of back pressure. On our boost pressure, we went from 7 pounds up to a peak of 12 pounds. So we had a much greater gain in back pressure than we did boost pressure. But if you look at the beginning of the curve, below 4,000 RPM, below 4,100 RPM, we had less back pressure than we had boost pressure. Boost pressure was actually higher than back pressure down there. But if we look at 6,500 RPM, we have a great deal more back pressure than we have boost pressure. Well, Richard, why is that the case? Why did that happen? Well, the important thing to understand is even if boost pressure was the same, like I said, all the way across, you would just have a change in where they intersect, where they cross over. But it's important to understand what happens with RPM. So if we had, and to give you an idea, if we look at this curve, right now at 3,500 RPM, back pressure is lower than boost pressure. So we have a 0.8 to 1 boost pressure to back pressure relationship. At 4,000, we have a 0.96. So it's increasing a little bit. It's getting closer to 1 to 1. At 4,500, we have a 1.07 to 1. This is where boost pressure now is lower than back pressure. At 5,000, we have a 1.7 to 1. At 5,500, we have a 1.32 to 1. At 6,000, we have a 1.4 to 1. And at 6,500, we have a 1.5 to 1 relationship between back pressure and boost pressure. That means we have 1.5 times as much back pressure as we have boost pressure. But you see that increased as we went up in RPM, that increased. So if we say that a turbo has 1.5 times as much back pressure as it has boost pressure, we have to ask where. That's not an absolute. It didn't have that down low. It didn't have that in the middle. It only had that at the very top, where the maximum amount of back pressure occurs. And you might be asking yourself, well, why is that the case? What happens there? What changed at RPM that made back pressure, made the back pressure increase with engine speed? And the answer is horsepower. I mean, we have, even if we kept the boost the same all the way across, the motor makes a lot more power. In fact, it makes peak power in this case at our peak engine speed. it makes more power at 6,500 RPM than it does at 3,000 or 3,500 or 4,000. And to give you an idea, this puts it into perspective, and this shows exactly why we have a rising back pressure curve with engine speed. So at 3,500 RPM, this particular combination made 400 horsepower, made 407. At 4,000, it made 494. At 4,500, it made 637. At 5,000, it made 736. At 5,500, it made 832. At 6,000, it made 890. And at 6,500, it made 959 horsepower. So again, down at 3,500, it's only making 400 horsepower. At 6,500, it's making more than double that. It's making 959 horsepower in this turbocharged 6-liter. And so what goes along with the motor making 950 horsepower? Well, 950 horsepower worth of exhaust flow going through the same turbo, where at 3,500, only 400 horsepower worth of exhaust flow was trying to make its way through that turbo, trying to drive that turbo. But at 6,500, more than double that amount of exhaust flow is going through, trying to force its way through that exhaust housing. So you can see that when we're trying to double the amount of flow and the heat and exhaust energy and all that, when we're trying to double that amount of flow through the same size orifice, what happens? We have more back pressure. And this is why whenever we do this testing, that we have way more exhaust back pressure at the peak RPM than we do down low, because we have a big change in power output. So again, even I know we have a slightly rising boost curve here, but even if we had the same boost all the way across, which is easily possible with an electronic controller, you control the turbo, just get it to rise up, as long as the turbo configuration relative to the naturally aspirated motor will support that kind of drive to make that amount of boost. So if we had 10 pounds of boost going all the way across, we would still have a rising boost curve, because we are asking the turbo, the hot side of the turbo specifically, to flow a lot more exhaust flow, making 950 horsepower instead of 400 horsepower. We're asking it to flow a lot more exhaust, the result of which is that we have a lot more back pressure because it's a restriction, right? Just like on the front side, if the boost goes up, we know that there's more of a restriction. If the back pressure goes up, we know that there's more of a restriction. And this is what happens with turbos. And this is why it happens. It happens because we're asking it to flow a lot more exhaust through the turbo. And this is the inherent problem or consideration that we have when we're doing turbos. If we were only revving this motor to 5,500 RPM, our boost pressure to back pressure would be just over 1-to-1. It'd actually be pretty good. In fact, I would argue that you'd be better off to put a much smaller turbo on this, because if we're only running to 5,500 where the thing was making 800 horsepower, I wouldn't have a turbo, in this case, it's capable of 1,200 horsepower. I probably wouldn't have that much leeway. I would have a much smaller turbo. We would bring the drive pressure up. We'd bring the response rate up. All of that stuff would happen. But this is why you need to look at this whole thing. But you need to know going in that because you have so much more exhaust flow at the horsepower peak than we do at the beginning of it, you are asking the turbo to do all of those things. Hey, I want you to have enough exhaust flow to not have, terribly high exhaust back pressure, to have that much drive pressure. I want you to not have that. But here's the thing that we all want. I also want you to have enough down low where you're only making less than half that amount of power. I want you to have enough to also be responsive down low. That's actually asking quite a bit, but it's why it's so, it's difficult for you to pick a turbo that does all of that. But it's not terribly hard to do that as long as you're realistic in the thing that you want. You can't have immediate boost response and I want a turbo that makes 2,000 or 3,000 horsepower. You're not going to have that. But if you narrow your realistic goals here, you probably can achieve that. So we'll see what you guys got going on. Turbo time. What's going on, Scottish Knowledge? Eric, what's going on? What's up, everybody? What's up, everybody? I'm running a 7675 Precision. When you 0.96 AR on a 6-liter, I figured it would be too much back pressure, but I assumed that would give me great boost response. That 7675 on a 6-liter is not going to be a problem. Your concern for back pressure is not warranted. It will be fine. I just want 1803 wheel horsepower reliably. That's a very specific amount, Mr. Williams. Need some information. I want to build your first car. Okay. Ask away, man. You're on the right spot. 2016 Mustang V6. I know I need a V8. You don't need a V8. Just make whatever you have, make it better. 1800 horsepower, but must have a massive budget. Get a 5-liter. Get a 5-liter. Everyone wants 1,000 horsepower. I see you guys are going back and forth. I have a Hellcat, 717 horsepower. A buddy of mine has one. Let me drive it. I want my own speed machine. I've always been fascinated with speed. Always driven fast cars. Okay. What turbo on a 4.8-liter LS would achieve laminar flow at both intake and exhaust? Effects versus peak output. I don't know what your definition of laminar flow is, because that has to do with the flow in the surface area and the surface. So that's not something we would discuss on a turbo application. But when you're saying laminar flow, are you meaning that it has the same boost pressure and back pressure relationship? Those are the same? That's actually not what you want in a turbo situation. Certainly not a street one. Love your channel. Watching for well over a year. I think I've watched every Ford video, plus most are not V8s because your videos. I'm building a 427 small block Ford with twin 66s. That should be plenty of power. 17 likes you. Eagles fan. Just built the turbo out of scrap behind the Giants facility. Turns out this new turbo set was putting out 1,000 horsepower. Very cool. Do you have an AAR CUDA? Because that would be really cool, Junior. Being a 4.8, I was thinking of swapping my motor and transmission out with a 4.8 LS, adding twin turbochargers to get closer to my goal. It's flow and turbos. I noticed on the Big Bang with a forward-facing tubular headers, you did a coil relocation. Was that with an ICT bracket by any chance? And where would you mount coils in the engine bay? I didn't. We didn't. We just zip tied them out of the way, basically. And doing that again, I wouldn't have the turbos go up like that. I would have them go down. I mean, I had the manifolds just go down. It just makes it easier. And I wouldn't ever use those manifolds again. I would use the Holley ones that have much better plug and plug wire access. Here in Eastern Canada, we're having a snowstorm, so any power is too much. Yeah. Be the best setup for a turbo 4.8. Swap with an automatic, preferably a 10-speed. I don't know about the swap stuff. I can answer your horsepower questions, but it's going to be a 4L80. Probably most people are going to recommend. Deploying and carrying wastegates and blow-off valves. Yes. My build is a 351 40 over 417 stroker. Is it? I hope the 417 is not the stroke length of the crank, or is it just going to? Is it just a 4-inch stroke and then it's a 417-inch motor? Those will work. Looking for cam suggestions for my 6-liter LQ4 706 heads. Vehicle is a 93 C35. I will use for towing. Damien, I think I would pick our Lobot truck camshaft for that. That's at richardholdenerperformance.com. On that 2016 V6 Stang. I thought I'd go through a couple of TO4Es on that thing and go from there. Yep, that'll work. Everything you say makes sense. And I have seen the same on my testing. The question is, how much does moving to a larger AR help to manage the, I don't know what you're talking about for TIP. Is it tip-in? Firebird group I joined is already mad at me for using the 3.8 liter. Have you seen the Huron Turbo LS manifolds? They look great and a decent price. I haven't seen those. I'll have to take a look. A 3.8 liter, the ones that are in those Camaros, you can certainly make power out of it, as we've shown from the 3800 stuff. It's that motor, so there are guys making lots of power with those. It's just like anything else. You put a decent cam in it, you put ported heads on it, put some kind of intake manifold on it that's going to dictate what RPM you want to run, and then you add boost from a turbo. Once you add boost from a turbo, like, really good things start to happen. How much does the larger AR help turbine inlet pressure? So back pressure is what you're asking about, right? You can change the relationship between boost pressure and back pressure with a change in AR. But because most situations don't have dramatic changes in AR, and if you are trying to make a dramatic change in AR, you probably should go to a different size turbo. I've run tests on smaller T3 stuff that we did long ago on a B16 Honda, where we went from a 0.48 to a 0.63 to a 0.82. And it had a big effect. We were trying to max the turbo out, so it had a fairly big effect on that because we were hot side limited on that turbo, but then also cold side limited almost immediately with that B16. I think we ended up making like 340 at the tire or something with that little T3 turbo. But you can affect that. But like I said, I would argue way more with the impeller side with a turbine, with a turbo size, basically. 417 stroke length, Eagle Forge crank with a 40 over piston gives a 427 twin turbo. Still working out the cam. Goals to have 2,500 to 6,000 power band out of the street car. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't put that stroke length in a stock 351 block. I would just go with a 4-inch stroke. I wouldn't go any farther than a 4-inch stroke. I wouldn't make a 427 like that, because if it's a twin turbo, you don't need that. You don't even need a 408. Yeah, 351 is fine for the turbo, because the turbo stuff is going to dictate the power. But if you want that, I just wouldn't do a 427. I wouldn't recommend that. The piston's going to come out of the bottom of the hole with that much stroke length. It's not going to be a great combination. Have you looked at the Vortec 4200? Yeah, Corbin, I have videos up on the 4200. Will you ever test a TS84 Torque Storm? Yeah, I have a couple of Torque Storms, but I have their earlier ones. Did the Big Bang LS6 have a stock crank? Yeah, all the Big Bang motors, for me, the definition of a Big Bang is the whole bottom end is stock. Stock block, stock crank, stock rod, stock pistons. We even reused the stock rings that came with the junkyard motor, and we just put ring gap in it. Be interesting to see what would happen to horsepower if the engine was held at a steady state 400, then bled off back pressure. So you're just going to increase turbine speed then? I don't know how you hold it at a steady state 400 horsepower. The dyno doesn't really know horsepower. it spits that out. But when you're holding it, you're not holding it at a horsepower number. Currently at 430 horsepower on a 1.6. We're going to try a slightly larger turbo and see what that does with back pressure and test another different set of cams. Okay. Do you have boost pressure and back pressure reading so that you could see what you're at? And what is the thing I would ask on a 1.6 if you're trying to make power with a turbo application, what is the NA power output? That's one thing, like on a V16 Honda, 1.6 liter Honda motor, that we can make pretty good power NA with that. And so we achieve the boosted power at a fairly low boost pressure. But I honestly would not look at back pressure unless it's really excessive and you're using too small of a turbo. I wouldn't look at back pressure in my search for horsepower on turbo small displacement motors, because we've done a bunch of testing on back pressure, and even at 2-to-1 or greater than 2-to-1, the change in power versus another turbo that doesn't have that high of back pressure is not significant. Everyone was saying 3800 is junk and can't make power. I tried to explain it. LS or nothing guys on there. Yeah, that's just nonsense. Have the benefit of dual VVT, so spool can be affected with overlap. Yeah, VVT helps. If it helps the average power production, then it will help with spool. If it can help low speed power, it will help with spool. Yeah, and 1.5-to-1, I wouldn't be worried about at all. If you go from 1.5-to-1 to 1-to-1 and you saw any change in power, I would be really surprised if you just changed the back pressure and didn't change the, well, I don't know how you're going to do that without changing the turbine. I just have to see how much I can score from the junkyard. Fingers crossed I find an LY6 with a twin turbo, keep 3.5 stroke and go for a higher RPM limit, or 4 stroke and keep around. Renegade, you can take a 351 and have it make peak power at 6,000 and with your turbo combination. You just need to size the turbo for the power output that you're trying to make. If you put together a 351 with a set of airflow research heads, for instance, and then you put a 220, 224 kind of camshaft in it, and like a dual plane intake manifold or some kind of long runner if it's an EFI deal, and you did that, and let's say it made peak power at 6,000 RPM and you added boost to it, it's still going to make peak power at 6,000 as long as the boost is consistent. So that's pretty easy to do. Engine is a 164 EcoBoost, 180 stock. Okay. The problem becomes with trying to run a lot of power on a stock motor is that's a 4-valve motor, so it's pretty good and has a decent intake manifold. The thing that it doesn't really have is it doesn't really have it could use more camshaft, and if you're not doing anything to improve the NA power output, then you just have to add boost. I'd like to see an LQ4 with a Trailblazer SS manifold, 862 heads, and both low buck and truck plus cams on the dyno. So the only thing that would be different would be 862 heads, because we just ran that, and that video is already up with both of those manifolds. We just ran 317 heads. We know that the 862 heads are just going to gain about 20 horsepower on both of those combinations. I'll put boosting rods on the LY6 for drag, twin turbo truck, then move the Gen 4 rods to my LQ4 street truck. Okay. DZP makes good stuff for the 3800. I wish they had more for the LS4, but the 3800s are good. Yeah, there's no reason that, given the amount of NA power that you can make with the 3800, that you can't do like 4-digit power levels with the 3800 with a turbo on it. I'm not a huge fan of the LS. Oh, the LS or nothing, that group. Yeah, that's just insecurity. I'd rather have a turbo that spools and more back pressure rather than trying to get one-to-one and having a laggy turbo. Yeah, if you have a turbo that's one-to-one, it's not going to be very responsive. We had that on our, well, we had the turbo that we used on our Bonneville car had less back pressure than boost pressure, but that's not ever a situation that I would recommend. Certainly not for any sort of street car. That would be that turbo is a terrible turbo for the street, because I drove it on the street and it's not good. You would just get killed by a guy that has a T3 T4 hybrid or something. He would just work you over. Even on a stock B16, he would just kill that car if you did a roll on in it. But he wouldn't go 227 miles an hour though. Ran a quick spool valve on a divided T4 TurboSmart TS2 6780 to find that it helped peak boost come on 1600 RPM earlier. The VW Touareg has a 3.6 liter VR6 running 2-bar boost. So you did that on a VR6 motor? Adding boost is like adding nitrous. It doesn't affect RPM, just more power. Yeah, if you have a naturally aspirated power curve, whatever it is, and you add 7 pounds of boost all the way through it, the curve is exactly the same. It makes peak torque the same. It makes peak horsepower at the same RPM. Everything is the same. It's just raised up and multiplied by 1.5 in that case, or thereabouts. We've done cams at around 10.5 millimeter lift, 260 degrees duration. Peak VE is like 118%. Just need to hold the torque higher up. Motor revs to 8,000. Yeah, you can adjust the effective RPM range, obviously with variable cam a little bit, with more duration in the camshaft, and then also with intake runner length. I don't know if you're still using the stock intake, which is probably on that motor a fairly long intake runner length. If you shorten the intake runner length, you'll lose power down low, but you'll gain power up top. What's a suggestion for forged parts? I would use the Summit Pro LS stuff probably. The crank I wouldn't worry about. Can you try a 4.3 liter? I have 4.3 liters videos up on the channel already. I've never run one with a factory EFI though. We've run them all carbureted or injected. Nah, I don't think we've run them. I don't think I've run any of them injected yet. Would I have any issue running the 76, 75 through a 3-inch exhaust and two to four mufflers? You're gonna like stack mufflers. Yeah, you're gonna make that more restrictive. A 76, 75 with a 3-inch exhaust is gonna be a little bit restrictive. It depends on. I wouldn't do that trying to maximize power. 205 AFR Type R box intake. Oh, the TFSR. Okay, looking at those GT30 580s, 66 millimeter twin. You run them a lot in your tests, running 5-pound spring on a wastegate with 10.5 pounds on a 3-way Holley boost controller. Goal is 600, 800, 1,000. Yeah, those turbos. And then Renegade, we're going to have turbos that are, we just tested them, that are going to be really good for that. GM put 4L65 Trans in SUV and 4L60s in pickups. Apparently they expect 1500s to be used as cars for the tailgate. I towed with mine a lot, but then I also had to change the transmission just to another 4L60. What turbo for 300 wheel horsepower on a stock 3800? That's all that you want? Turbo Sensor, we have one for that, or we will have one for that. We added boost turbo to an NA VR6, went from 300 horsepower to 900 horsepower with 2-bar boost. Back pressure was needed with the QSV to get the turbo speed up because the turbo is super light. Does a VR6 make 300 horsepower at the crank? Is that a really good one or something? Like, I don't know what they make. I don't know what they make NA. But if it makes 300 flywheel NA and then getting it to 900 is 2-bar boost. Yeah, great videos, but I need one with stock EFI just to see. I bought a whole vehicle, but it runs good. Scared to mess with it. Yeah, I don't know about running that factory Spider fuel injection stuff. 76, 75 through 3-inch exhaust is for a street truck, not going for max power. Yeah, then that will be fine. That turbo should be good for 1150. I may not only go to 1,000 at the most. Would be expecting too much. 1,000 is not what I try to run through a 3-inch exhaust, but you can. I'm gonna daily it. Okay, Centric. Slap a whole set HX40 on a 3.8 liter. Daily power with that setup would, let's see, be fine running 10 to 11 pounds most of the time. $10 to $11 on a cammed 6-liter on a LQ4 is going to be 700 to 750, something like that. 7675 is too small a turbine side. You need an 8896 to make 1,000. No, that's not true. What was your favorite Mustang from Muscle Mustangs fast forwards or the Super Ford days? Mine, the one that I have. Found an old turbo laying around in the garage. T3 or T. Looks like a T3 or T4. 0.5 AR. I don't know that I've ever seen that. I have to measure it, but I don't know what's good for on power. Who's going to sell it? I don't know. I mean, there's a big difference between a T3 and a T4. That's pretty easy to measure on that flange. Can't wait to see them. Got some time. Current motor 351 40 over NA 400 of the wheels. All lifters on the driver's side broke, so we need a new cam. Redoing the block. Why did the lifters break? What's going on with that? 7675. The 7675 I had from Precision easily made 1,000. Any plans on a Big Bang 4.3 liter? No, I don't think so. The problem is I don't have a good set of aluminum heads that I would want to put on there. I'm going to go ahead and put this back up. That's our boost pressure. Isn't there a way to run a turbo through an exhaust when not in boost and run it through a water gate when in boost? You want to bypass the exhaust around the turbo? Is that what you're asking to do? Oh, 3.6 liter VR6. Okay. Makes 300 crank horsepower when tuned. So Porsche Cayenne base with the same VR6 is rated at 300 crank horsepower from the factory. Okay. I didn't realize it was that big. For some reason, I thought that they were 2.8s, but I wouldn't do an HX on 3.8. Something tighter for response. Yeah, the one that I have is going to be way better than an HX. TFA dynos on EFI carb style elbows. Yeah, we have done some blow through stuff on that. Some say divider is good for equal air, but most don't have a divider on the elbow. A divider in the we normally don't run that. The one that we run is from CSU. Through dump only in boost and through exhaust when not in boost. Oh yeah, you can have a on the exhaust, you can put an exhaust cutout on it if that's what you're talking about after the turbo. That's certainly possible. I'm building LQ4 for gas only class. I'm shopping Forged pistons rods. Plan on running 317s for boost, 243s NA. Should I go 2cc flat tops or 12cc dish? Are you swapping the heads on that for running one or the other? I don't think I'd be going through to do that. Guessing one of my old roommates bought the turbo and never used it because it's small and looks brand new. What's the least amount of power you'd think a 416 stroker with twin 6266s might make? I won a race with my Z01 recently that I was certain I would lose. The least amount of power? Well, what if they were just didn't have the turbos like making boost at all? Then it's just to be an NA one. VR6 was 2.8, then a 3.2, and then 3.6. Okay. Yeah, see, I'm not hip on the VR6 stuff. But that's good. If you start with 300 and you add 1 atmosphere, you got 6. You add another atmosphere, you get 9. Boom. Away you go. I think of building up the motor with lifters going 0.3 lifters. The rollers broke off. Bought the car with the current build, not been a bad head, and said only had 300 miles on it. Yeah, I would be weird. I'd be leery of the lifters breaking because I don't see that. I'm wondering what caused that. I could hear the turbos also. The man had a fender exit. Yeah, Sean, there's no way to estimate stuff like that. Obviously, if you have turbos on one and a blower on the other, the turbos at any given boost level are going to make more power. Now, the question is when you're racing, if you're doing a roll-on or whatever, did the motor have boost from the turbos the way that the blower has boost from that, like on the immediate hit? Does it have that? Because if it doesn't have that and this one jumps up ahead, then this one, even if it makes more power, has to make up that ground. Stayed with him to 120, then he started walking away. Okay, that's kind of what I would expect from turbo stuff, like the situation that I just described. It's for Bonneville, seems the cheapest way to change compression without having a different engine or bumping into the fuel classes. Oh, so you want to do that swap at the, you're going to run an NA class and then do the turbo on it. For me, I would just leave the high compression heads on and then just take the turbos off and just run it with good enough fuel that small change in compression, I would just run the turbos, run the turbos in the turbo class and then run the NA in the NA class, and I would not swap the heads. It just makes it easier on the Salt to do that. And as long as you run good enough octane, that's not going to be a problem. Log exhaust manifolds on a 454 running a 78, 75 turbo looking for around 600 horsepower. Yeah, that's all easy. Question, will the exhaust be restricted or should I get some different headers? It's for a camping truck. No, the stock exhaust manifolds, you could make 1,000 horsepower with if you wanted to do that. That's not a problem. Looking into mounting an M90 on one of my flatheads. If I can make a decent looking intake for the M90, yep, that'll be good. I just assumed something on his end was broken. Didn't expect my bone stock manual supercharger car to top end something with turbos and more displacement. We can only run their pump gas, so I can't use their fuel. You at Bonneville, you can't. Are you running in a gas class? If you're running in a gas class, I don't know what thing you're talking about for Bonneville, but in a gas class, you could run any kind of fuel that's not methanol or E85 or nitrous, but you can run race gas in any gas class. So we run, like when we're running gas in it, we run 118 or 120 in it. And then on a fuel class, we just run the same fuel in it because we're not trying to do anything different. I've never tried to run E85 at Bonneville, but we certainly could. And then you can also add nitrous to it or run methanol, which a lot of guys do. I live in Phoenix. Would you recommend a 4-inch intercooler for the 7675, or what would match the setup running through a 3-inch exhaust? I don't think you need a 4-inch inlet and outlet into the intercooler. All of our stuff is 3.5, as long as the intercooler core is enough. Never seen lifters break like that. The roller was sitting in the oil pan. The other two were cracked and missing pins. Yeah, because that Renegade, that sounds to me like a mechanical interference problem somewhere. Like, did the was it a valve float thing where the lifter was hammering on the camshaft? Did the camshaft and or the lifter somehow stop? Like, was it a coil bind issue? Or it sounds something like that. That's what I meant. Oh, the core size. Okay. Yeah, you run an intercooler that size to not be restrictive on that. If you're not trying to get all of the boost out of that thing, like you don't need a 1500 horsepower core for if you're only ever going to be running 600 or 700 horsepower. I think that look at the ones that we ran on the Pro Charger when we did their intercooler upgrade. It was definitely worth more power. TurboTop 1 atmosphere, 16 psi. No, it's 14.7 psi. I don't know if the cam was too much. A 294 at 50? Yeah, I think 294 might be the advertised number, not the 50 number. And a camshaft that's 294 at 50 wouldn't be 550 lift. It'd be like 850 lifts. or at least 750. So 294 is probably an advertised number. Because otherwise that seems like a lot. I'm very excited. I can't wait to share all the turbo goodness data. Low buck truck in a 6-liter or the 7675 would be a nice ride. Yeah. Yeah, even in a 5.3, it's a good combination. (10 to 14 psi). I want to have the boost adjustable in cab so I can unleash it when necessary. Okay. Yeah, boost controller, electronic boost controller allows you to do that. And on a cam 6-liter like that, you're talking about 30 horsepower per pound of boost. So from 10 psi to 14 psi, you're talking about adding another 120 horsepower. That's a lot. That'll make a difference. As long as the tune's right. And that gain that you get, the amount of horsepower per pound of boost, is a function of the NA power output, but it's also a function of, do you have enough octane so that you can run the amount of timing that's required to get that kind of power gain. Boost control from the cab is the gas pedal. You're only putting it part way down. Is there anything to powdered sintered rods being weaker with mileage? Not if what we see from these junkyard motors, these LS motors, I don't know if that's a sintered rod, but the factory rods, all of the Big Bang motors have had 200,000+ miles on them. And they keep running and make power. Maybe hard to find information. I got the number. It only said 112, 294, 300. The heads were set up with 550 lifts, so maybe it was a bad cam and head setup. Yeah, you need to measure and see what the lift is. You can do that with a checker spring and just put the lifter and push rod and tighten it all up. Put a solid roller in it and just see what it is. My guess is the 294 is a 50 number, which is still a pretty good size cam, but not a 294 at 50, because a 294 at 50 is on a 351 is not going to run very well. I found my answer. Yeah, 14.7 is 1 atmosphere. Yeah. I completely misread the gasoline fuel section of the SCTA rulebook. Being able to run better gas opens things up a lot. Yeah, it does. You don't have to run pump gas. It does. When they say gas, it doesn't mean pump gas. It doesn't mean you have to run 91 or 93. You could run all of those things fit into gas. So run good gas in it. Run 118 or whatever, and then just go nuts on how much boost and stuff you can run. So just put the octane in it, put the compression in it, and don't put a lot. You don't need more than 10 to 1 or whatever, 11 to 1, and then just put lots of boost in it. Put a good intercooler on it. How much boost should you run on the LY6 with a 2-bar map sensor? Well, a 2-bar map sensor is 14 pounds. Well, 14.7 pounds. Almost done fixing the frame and fenders, just waiting for the temp to get above 30 degrees. Yeah, that's cold. Like the 14.7 number, it just seems right. Feels like it would be perfect. Okay. On my Megasquirt setups, I run 4-bar sensors. It's more than enough. The thing that I don't like about those, about running that setup, is the resolution gets not very good when you're trying to get all the cells filled in. I'm driving, and the background noise sounds like knock. Is it activating your knock sensors? If my hard drives are activating knock sensors, that's a problem. I mean, this computer is probably from the 80s. Probably not the 80s, but not that far back. You haven't run any water method injection with turbos? Yes, we have. Yeah, the old Predator noise. I know, that's good. I would like my blow-off valve to make that noise. That would be cool. All right, LQ9 with 105 millimeter turbo for Bonneville. On the dyno, we went 1 to 1.5 for back pressure. In racing, I would start seeing positive manifold pressure about 1.5 seconds after wide open throttle. When are you able to go to wide open throttle at Bonneville? My guess is way, way out there somewhere. And I don't know what you mean by 1 to 1.5. Is it 1.5 to 1? So that's like what this one was, at least at the peak. Who runs knock sensors? Do any racers use titanium connecting rods? I noticed that Steve Morse runs aluminum rods for a while. I had to replace them. Yeah, aluminum rods in our race motors. That's the way that I look at it. I don't build motors with aluminum rods in them. Titanium rods they use them in some of the factory stuff. The NSX that I had obviously had that. One of the LS motors, right? An LS9 or LS7 or something had titanium rods. But I don't think they use them very often in racing. And what were the results of running methanol? I don't know what you mean by the results. The results of running a water methanol injection is that it lowers the charge temperature and changes the detonation threshold. But the problem is that it's not distributed equally in all the cylinders. They do in road racing. Yeah, LS7 had titanium rods. Yeah. A bunch of factory BMWs had titanium rods. Yeah, the factory was fairly successful in it. But I don't see a lot of people seeking those out for their builds for performance stuff. Performance builds. What are we barking at, huh? Crazy dog. Chris, we will be offering turbo, not direct kits for specific applications, but the things that you need to put one together. Yes. Turbos, probably manifolds, intercoolers. We have, injectors and pumps, that sort of stuff, and obviously the turbos themselves. I want to try to find some good blow-off valves that are affordable, and then also wastegates. I really like the TurboSmart stuff, but they're not cheap. They work really well though. I'd like to find some that I can, kind of trust. That we can sell TurboSmart stuff too, but I like to find some that are a little more cost effective, but they also have to be effective. That's an important part. T-Wizard wants to know where he finds an LSA supercharger for sale reasonably priced. I don't know that those things go together anymore. You just have to look online. That's one of the reasons that I haven't run one, is that's not really an affordable thing anymore. Back when people, back in the beginning, people were taking those off and upgrading them for other things, Kenny Bells and Whipples and the TVSs, the 2650s. Then, you know, they're just taking them off. But, you know, for a person that doesn't have anything, you need the whole thing. You need the front drive assembly, you need the intake manifold, the blower, the inlet, all that stuff. You sell them for 4,000 brand new. Do they sell? But that's like I said. Do they sell the whole kit for 4,000? Have you ever used electronic wastegates? No, I've not used an electronic wastegate. Like to get an F1A charger, but they're like $6,000 for the $6,000 for just the supercharger. That seems like a lot. I didn't think that they were anywhere near that much. We've had a handful of LS superchargers show up on Marketplace. The alternative to that is you can get one of these kits that Tom DeMuse has, or the SWS guy has. You know, you put a Holley low ram on with an adapter plate, and then you could put an M122 from the GT500 stuff on there, and that's an M122 is, I think, bigger than an LSA supercharger, so I think you could get more power. Junkyard NA2JZ with ring gap would make for a very popular video. Where does the oil feed line run from to the turbo? I know the drains run down to the oil pan. Do I need a fitting from my oil pump? No, you want to run the oil from the back of the top of the engine, depending on whether it's a Gen 4 or a Gen 3, but you have an oil pressure sending unit on the block, or on a Gen 4, you have it on the valley cover, and you want to tee off of that. You can also run it from a fitting that people drill and tap, and I think ICT Billet and those guys have them, the little fitting that bolts right above where I think that's probably in the pan, right above where the oil filter is. You can take it off of there. Where did you say the M122 adapters were? Look up DeMuse Engineering, or the other one I think is SWS. I think that's the guy. Look on Facebook and Instagram. He's got a bunch of stuff. I'm trying to get 900 wheel horsepower out of a TS84 Torque Storm. Okay. I think I would start by making a really, really good NA motor to be able to do that. They do have twin Torque Storm deals, which we've run. Don't let the GTE guys know the GE heads are better. Also, speaking of the Fox body doing 200, I got a 400 horsepower Fox body to do 200 on Forza. So the video game says it's legit. That's all we need, right? That's a win. Back pressure was 1.5 times boost pressure. I thought that the large frame turbo would be more lazy than it was. I was going wide open throttle in third, fourth, and fifth. Admittedly, this was the truck that I wrecked. Okay. Yeah, and it depends on when you get into wide open throttle, at what RPM that you're talking about. Like we said, as RPM increases, back pressure increases. The latest set of turbos I have messed with was 4G63. SWS just started producing adapters. Yeah. I had a 93 Fox. It topped out at 187, 200. I don't know. Maybe it had a T56, was running a T5 with a solid axle. So you must have done a lot of stuff to your Fox Mustang to go 187. Is 36 pounds of dome to make 20 pounds of boost too much? Why would it take anywhere near that? A GTX 88 should make 20 pounds with, you got something going on there. You should be able to make 20 pounds of boost with a GTX 88 with like a 14-pound spring and a manual controller with nothing going to the top of it. New BTR rods and crank, twin turbo build, 408, measuring plastic gauge reading on rods. I think it's okay. No, 1.5 thou of rod bearing clearance is not enough. We have more. We always run more than that. What cars do I have? I have got I'm an original owner of an 88 5-liter LX Mustang. I've got a 71 240Z and a Silverado and a Omni Jill HS and any cam, 3-pound springs, 36 pounds of dome, barely made 20 pounds of boost. If you, I don't, what kind of back pressure do you have? Because even with a 3-pound spring, which I don't recommend to try to run 20 pounds, even with a 3-pound spring, if you have a 3-pound spring plus boost, that means you have to have, I don't know what the relationship is going to be on the surface area for the wastegate, but you have to have more back pressure than that to try to open that up. So 36 plus 3 is 39 and 29 pounds. Or 39 minus 20 is 19. So you have 19, at least 19 pounds more back pressure than you have boost pressure. So you have a lot of back pressure, it seems like. Where should my timing be around? 3rd gen 6-liter, 95-pound injectors. I don't know. I don't know what octane you're running. Reversion can happen with back pressure. Reversion, you mean going back into the combustion chamber? Do electronic wastegates handle high boost pressure without needing COT? I don't know. I don't know how they're operating them electronically. I don't know if it's a solenoid, and then I don't know if they're spring assisted with the solenoid. I just have never looked into the inside of them. I like my 240 more than my Supra. Pump 91. Yeah, I'm the wrong guy to ask. I know that when Matt does it, he says 14 pounds of boost and 14 degrees of timing, but you should put the timing where it doesn't detonate. And the timing is going to be different at the peak, at the horsepower peak, than it is at the torque peak. And then it's going to be different than it is down low. 3800 in my Firebird has 400,000 miles on it. Still running good. There you go. Is 1.38 AR too small for a 408? I don't know. I don't remember what size turbo that is. I don't know what size turbo that is and what size and how much power you're trying to make. Oh, that's the GTX 88. That should make a lot more than that. Do you know how much power that is? Wastegates are probably like an IAC on a cable TPS. GTX 5518, like an 88 118. Yeah, that shouldn't have that kind of back pressure. Something's going on. Australia, what's going on? You're here just in time because we have 1 more minute. Yeah, GTX 88 is a big turbo, and you have a big hot side on that, so there's something going on there. Could somebody who has never tuned learn to tune without going to school for it realistically? Yeah, it just takes time and experience and broken stuff. You have to know what the thing is going to want, and if you don't know from reading stuff, then you have to know from experiencing stuff and learning stuff. You should get information, as much information as you can, so that you know a good place to start, and you have a good place to start that's always safe. And a good place to start is always the NA, and then you take away obviously from that. Yeah, if you can have somebody tune it and then look at that tune and go, oh, well, he put 8 degrees here and 10 degrees here and 12 degrees here and then 16 degrees on the top. And, you look at all that stuff. But you have to understand the fundamentals, though. You have to understand that a motor needs less timing at lower engine speeds than it does at higher engine speeds with I went 169 miles an hour on a stock turbo B18 GSR head. I tuned myself learning from YouTube. Okay. Yeah, it's certainly possible to make the power to go that speed. I think we went more than 150 on like 200 horsepower at the tire. That was an NA one. And doing it at Bonneville on an NA one is harder because it's the density altitude there is not conducive to NA power outputs. It's a little bit less of a problem with a turbo, because it corrects almost for altitude. And on that note, it is time to go. I will see you guys all later.